Welcome to What's the Purpose of It, the podcast where we challenge the current work paradigm and explore how to shift from competition to regeneration, from stress to purpose. Let's rethink work together.
We need to change our approach. There really is what we call a business case for sustainability, meaning that there are genuine business benefits for tackling social and environmental and ethical issues. Young people especially want to work for companies that they feel are bringing solutions and that are not part of the problem. The better people's well-being in the workplace, the more productive they are, the more motivated they are, the more likely they are to stay with the company. At the end of the day, it really is a question of your own future success. What business should understand is the concept of investment. And an investment is by definition spending money today to get a return in the future. And that's essentially what investing in regeneration is about. The world is changing, and it will change whether we like it or not. We have to make these transitions, otherwise it all breaks down, and nobody actually wants breakdown.
Today we're joined by Professor Wayne Visser, one of the world's top 10 experts in sustainability and regenerative business, a fellow at the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, and author of the international bestseller Thriving. Today we'll explore how mental health plays a key role in transitioning to a regenerative business paradigm. So Wayne, what do you think are the signs that we really need to look at, that we must shift from a competitive paradigm in the business sector and in the workplace to a regenerative one?
Well, we only have to look at the trends, and those are trends across nature, society, and the economy. What we see is that nature is breaking down, whether that be ecosystems or resources that we're over-consuming. We see that inequality is increasing in our societies. We see that discrimination continues in the workplace and in our supply chains. We see that health and well-being is still a challenge in our societies, in our communities, in our workplaces. And we see that we face more and more crises or disruptions, whether that be due to climate events or industrial accidents or pandemics. And we are not yet very good at coping with those. And so all of this has been the result of 50 years at least, or if you take the whole Industrial Revolution, 150 years of a certain kind of business model and a certain kind of economic ideology, really. And it's been disastrous for the environment and often for society and even for the economy. So we need to change our approach.
I would say we did the best with what we had, but honestly, in this case, it's not something I can declare right now. I usually look at the past as we have done the best with whatever was presented to us. But now looking back, I think we could have done better. However, I work in the HR and career counseling area, and I work a lot with companies. And the thing I feel the most is that many companies are in denial. It's like it's not happening, really. And I was just searching Google the other day, like, what are the best jobs for 2050? And I find it somehow funny because all the jobs are about high tech. But we're not thinking that we might be scorched by 2050. We might not really have that much food around. We might be covered in products that we actually don't use. So how do we convince companies? Or should we even go there? Is it anyone's job to convince companies that this is coming?
Well, you're right about all of those things. And we tend in business, also in politics, to be very short-term oriented. And we think about our immediate needs and our immediate opportunities. And that's always one of the challenges with what we often call sustainability challenges, is that they're more long-term. And so how do you convince companies? There are a number of ways. The first is that there really is what we call a business case for sustainability, meaning that there are genuine business benefits for tackling social and environmental and ethical issues. It can reduce your risks of non-compliance or of communities or other stakeholders, customers turning against you. It can improve your reputation and your brand. It can help you attract and retain the top talent. And always, you mentioned HR, always now we're in a war for talent. And young people especially want to work for companies that they feel are bringing solutions and that are not part of the problem. And numerous other benefits. If you get into the right sectors, these are revenue growing sectors like clean technology, or if you reduce your waste or your energy consumption or your water consumption, those are cost savings. So that's one set of arguments that can help to persuade many companies. But then I also do think we need governments to step in and to represent the public interest and to create legislation that forces or at least nudges companies to change and to probably change faster than they would on their own. We have an experiment in deregulation for the last 50 or 60 years, and it hasn't worked from a social or environmental perspective. It's meant that business has, of course, looked after its own interests, but imposed the costs on society and on nature.
I kind of look at it that until now, in organizations, even if somebody intended that or didn't, we kind of use even humans in order to create a lot of profit, but we didn't really took a second look on how are we affecting people. And we liked to work. Like in the past few years, workism has been some sort of a religion. People really like to hustle. They really like to pull through. They like to prove themselves to get some validation with a promotion. And I don't know, just bring benefits to the company and be employee of the month. And it has been some sort of a religion for the past few years, but now it's slowly downgrading. And I was thinking of your concept of thriving, and of course, the concept you're talking about in your latest book of thriving. And could you explain how do you see thriving, not only in the business area, but also in the workplace, how people feel at work?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And it's important to point out that when I talk about thriving, which is really about going beyond just surviving, beyond even sustaining, which is why I think it's more than sustainability. It does mean to have a positive effect on nature, but also on people and on the economy. So the people element, there are really two fundamental areas. The one is, are we treating people fairly? Is there discrimination in the workplace? And this is the whole diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda, and also dealing more broadly with inequality, not only in society, but within our own companies. Inequality, if you look at the CEO to worker pay, has gone up from something like 20 to 1 in 1970 to usually more like 300 to 1 now, if you look at the largest companies. And then if you take the mega rich CEOs, like Amazon, it would take you 6,000 years to earn what your CEO is earning if you're an average worker there. So, that's one element. Can we have fair workplaces where people are respected, where there's genuine human rights, including in the supply chain, all of those suppliers? The other element is health. Are people both physically and mentally having good well-being? And phenomenon you refer to, a kind of almost workaholism, or the over dedication to work, where we lose the so-called work-life balance, or the expectation is that we live to work rather than work to live. This has obviously created physical but also mental well-being problems. We see stress in the workplace going up. We see burnout happening more and more, and companies really struggling to tackle that. So thriving in a workplace has to mean that people feel motivated to be there, but also are healthy. We actually created at Antwerp Management School, where I have a role, we created a well-being group where we worked with companies to try to advance some of these ideas. And we created something called the Good Work Goals. And there are 10 good work goals. So you can always look those up. But, that includes things like healthy work, meaningful work, happy work, sustainable work, and so on. So, I think it's essential. I'll just mention one thing, because you say that it's become a bit of a religion to work hard and so on. I saw a study a number of years ago that identified a group called the TIREDS, TIREDS, and that stood for 30-something independent, radical, educated dropouts. In other words, young people who have all of the promise of their careers ahead, they're rising up through the ranks in companies, and then they just drop out. And the reason they drop out, they say, is they want less demand and deeper reward. So they're not actually interested in working those 16-hour days or whatever it may be. And they want something more meaningful than just trying to grow the company's profits or sales. They need a purpose. They need something that they can believe in. So I think we have to keep an eye on that. We have to say that engagement in the workplace is one of the best measures of whether people are really, feeling healthy and motivated. And it's linked very much in a positive way to a company doing sustainable and ethical things, and in a negative way to this culture of overwork.
I loved what you're saying. It was straight to my heart, because I'm a seeker of purpose. That's what I do. I'm a purpose storyteller, and our podcast, it's also called What's the Purpose of It? And I feel that in the past few years, I'm doing recruitment for 15 years already. And the one thing I've noticed in the past few years is that we don't only have a labor crisis, which is happening throughout the globe. We also have a very big meaning crisis, but we're too focused on surviving to look at the indicators of thriving. So you mentioned that one of the things that companies should take care of is health, like physical and mental. And I love that you said mental health, because I must admit, in Romania, it's a topic that we just shyly started talking about. And in the context of regenerative business, what do you see that is the purpose of mental health? Why should a company put mental health at the core of their human strategy?
Yeah, well, it is a problem that is global and is getting worse. 1 in 10 people today suffer from severe anxiety, and stress, and often that is leading to not only burnout, but sometimes depression, even suicide. And it's a number that's going up. So we have to pay attention. The reason why companies would tackle this is that there's very, very clear evidence that the better people's well-being in the workplace, the more productive they are, the more motivated they are, the more likely they are to stay with the company, the more likely they are to recommend the company to others. So there are real business benefits. And I did see some statistics at one time that suggested that it can even be as much as a quarter of payroll costs that are accounted for by people being healthy in the workplace. If you invest in people's well-being, you're actually going to save that money, whether it's through avoided recruitment and retention costs or through people not going on long-term sick leave. There are many very direct costs associated with health and well-being. So I think it's absolutely critical that this is part of the agenda.
So there's definitely a return of investment on that. I was wondering if there are any examples you can give of companies, not of course within confidentiality terms, of companies that adopted this regenerative practices. What exactly did they do? I'm thinking maybe there's a lot of managers or CEOs or small business owners that are watching this and they're wondering, okay, this sounds like quite complicated. Where do I start?
Yeah, it's a great question. And what I tried to do in the book to unpack this is to say, firstly, there are 6 transitions we're going through as a global society, and that is to try to shift from breakdowns in our systems to breakthroughs.
I love that.
The first thing is to be aware of those 6 transitions, and very, very briefly, they are to go from degradation to restoration of ecosystems, to go from depletion to renewal of resources, to go from disparity or inequality to responsibility in our workplaces and supply chains, to go from disease to revitalization of health, to go from disconnection, which is unequal access to technology, to what I call rewiring through a digital economy, and to go from disruption to resilience in our infrastructure and our institutions. So the first thing is to be aware of these 6 transitions and to think about how each of those affects your business. Either you're part of the solution in those transitions or you're part of the problem. The next thing is to say, are there practical steps that we can take as a company? And there are. So I have a methodology I call integrated value management. I've worked with companies like Johnson & Johnson over a number of years to implement these. And they're things like you start by training your staff on systems thinking. And this simply means being able to see the big picture and to see how things are connected. How are environmental issues connected to human issues of social equality, for example? So that's the first stage. It's really a kind of a context analysis that companies do, mapping out, how do they interact with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals? How are those relevant to their value chains? The second step is really about stakeholders. How do they interact with customers, suppliers, government, employees, and all the other stakeholders? But what do those stakeholders really want from them? What are their expectations and needs? What do they think is important? So we do something which we call a stakeholder materiality assessment, and we look at what partnerships companies can engage in to help us tackle these big issues. Why partnerships? Because these are difficult problems. We call them entangled problems. And so a company can't solve these things on its own. It has to work with civil society, with NGOs, with governments, with universities, and so on. The third step is you've got to look at your values. So, what are your ethics? What are the principles that you are running your business with? And are they being consistently applied in the workplace? Lots of companies have values on their boardroom walls, but then how are people actually treated in the workplace? How are they incentivized? Then you look at strategic goals, and are those goals very ambitious, very clear, very much about making a contribution to society? So goals around sales or revenues, profitability, these are not meaningful goals for, inspiring people to be with your company. So we're looking at impact on society, big goals. And then you look at the measures. So are you reporting? Do you have KPIs, key performance indicators? There's some nudge from legislation in Europe, especially the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. But basically, are you tracking that performance against those strategic goals? Are the goals themselves aligned to the stakeholder needs? And then finally, it's looking at innovation. We don't really create a thriving society and a thriving economy, thriving nature, unless the products and services that we're putting out there into the world are themselves solutions rather than problems. So the main thing really a company has to do is to innovate their own core offering, whatever that may be, whatever product or service they create. Is it inherently regenerative? And we can talk about what that really means.
Wow, I love the plan. So HR girl here, love to hear about a good diagnose. And I was like thinking right now, what if I would be the devil's advocate for 1 second? And I would go into the company's shoes. And I would be like, so I've had the past few years doing a lot of stuff to grow my profit. And it doesn't matter if it was fair or unfair to others. I just got used to it. It's really nice. I'm making a lot of money. My board members are happy. My stakeholders are happy. And now there's all this change that comes over. And all of a sudden, I have to care about a lot of things. All of a sudden, I have to look at the fact that, as Elderman Trust Barometer just said 2 years ago, people look more at the CEO than at the president of their country. People are more attached to their coworkers than to their neighbors. So all of a sudden, as a company, I become this core of my employees' life. I become like this community, and I have to give them so much. I have to give them education, because the education system doesn't really prepare them for the labor market that I need in 5, 10, 20 years. I have to take care of their family. I need to give them like medical benefits for their family. Now I also need to train all my managers and all my HR, because the way they used to do business until now with the stick and carrot, it doesn't work, and people don't respond to that anymore. And there comes like a new trend. I also need to be regenerative. Where should I take all the money for all this stuff from? How much does it cost?
Yeah, it can be overwhelming for companies, and like human beings, companies don't like to change. If they think they're on a successful path, then they prefer to defend the status quo. And we see that with a lot of companies, and especially a lot of industries now that are needing to change. Take the fossil fuel industry as an example, digging in their heels and trying to slow down that change. But the thing is, the world is changing, and it will change whether we like it or not. We have to make these transitions. Otherwise, it all breaks down, and nobody actually wants breakdown. And so the pressure will just continue to mount. If you take something like climate change, we know we have to get to net zero. So that energy transition is absolutely inevitable. So you can either be somebody fighting that and trying to make your last, bit of money, squeeze, the last bit out of the old business, or you can prepare yourself to be competitive in the new economy. And so at the end of the day, it really is a question of your own future success. And what business should understand is the concept of investment. You only create value when you invest in something, and an investment is by definition spending money today to get a return in the future. And that's essentially what investing in regeneration is about. It's knowing that this is the trend, this is the way the world is going. There will be winners and losers. Not everybody will survive that transition. And that's the question to the leaders. Do they want to be part of that old guard, the sort of dinosaurs that die out, or do they want to be leading the new revolution or the new economy? And it's as simple as that. It's not that they can't make a lot of money in the present or in the near-term future. But what we know from studying change, especially technology-driven change, which a lot of this is that collapse of companies and of industries can happen extremely fast. And so if you leave it too late and you just think, I'll be able to adapt right at the end, it may be too late for you.
Might be a bit of a surprise, but I also say that the market also knows how to regenerate itself. If we don't go into a regenerative mode, the market apparently knows how to do it. And I'm mostly talking about the labor market because that's where I'm working the most at. But you mentioned something that gets me curious a bit more. You said something about leaders. They need to make a choice. Do they want to be in the old guard, or do they want to be on the verge of the revolution of the regenerative business? And I was wondering, since, okay, we've talked a lot about companies, organizations, but the companies are also like some people, right? What do you think that are the main three skills or things that leaders and HR, because I'm also going to get my colleagues from the HR department pushed into this, what do you think they need to acquire? Like three specific skills that are like mandatory in the world that's coming?
Yeah, well, it happens that I've studied this quite a lot through Cambridge, through the Institute for Sustainability Leadership, as well as through my other affiliations. And it's very clear that there are some characteristics that enable some leaders to perform better in this new reality where we're having to deal with all of these complex global challenges. And I'm afraid there aren't three, but there are six characteristics. At least, I've distilled it down to that. But they are things like the ability to be strategic. So can you really think and act long term? That's really tough when the markets are very short-term focused, and the pressure even on CEOs who often have a life of about 3 years in the role, are under constant short-term pressure. But that ability to think and to act long-term is one thing. Caring is another one. So do you have a good emotional intelligence? Because so much of this is about bringing people along with you. And that includes, of course, your employees, because you're going to need to help them to change, but it's also all of your stakeholders. And sometimes they won't be agreeing with you. So how can you, have a partnership-based approach that relies on being caring or being empathetic? So a related one there is inclusive. We need leaders now that don't believe that they can do things themselves, but that this has to be a partnership, whether that's a team-based culture within the company or collaboration within the larger economy. So that's with NGOs, with universities, with governments, and so on. Creative is another one that's really, really important. We need the innovation spirit. We need leaders who are not just digging in to protect what they've built in the past, but actually creating the future that they want through their companies and their products and services. So having that openness to experiment, to fail, and to come with new solutions. And finally, I would say, again, we call it systemic or systems thinking, being able to live in a very confusing, complex, interconnected world, and to see the patterns, to realize that everything has unintended consequences, to do things not simply because you believe A causes B, but because you've already thought about what's the unintended consequence of B, knocking on an effect to C, and C causing a change to D. So really thinking about systemic problems, but also systemic solutions, where you may be coming with a solution that tackles more than one of those great transitions I talked about. Maybe you have a circular economy solution that's also good for improving social justice or inclusion. or you have a health solution that actually is also good for the ecosystem health, and so on.
Oh, that sounds like very nice. So there's a list of to do for 2025 for our leaders are there and managers and HR colleagues of mine. We're getting really close to the end of our conversation, although I think I could stay here for like at least 10 hours. And I know that when we're talking about the regenerative paradigm, it's so much more than discussing how do organizations need to change or how the workplaces will change. I know we should also talk about how we live in our communities. We should talk about the society as a whole, how we work, and also how we study. We should also talk about education. And one thing that I notice a lot, at least in Romania, I'm not well aware about what's happening in other countries, is that we have this image that education is like a factory of people that need to learn how to work, period. That's it. That's the sole purpose of education, apparently, to teach us to be really good workers. In this regenerative paradigm, should we also look at how we do education?
Well, this is one of the building blocks of how you change the world, really. Education is one, reforming our financial and economic system is another. Education, because we do need this different kind of leader, and education is about preparing future leaders. We need people who understand the breakdowns that we're grappling with and the breakthroughs that we can create. And we certainly needed to be more than just a commercially minded, employee-focused education, because that's what got us into the trouble that we're in the first place. We've had a very narrow view of what it means to be educated. And we created at Antwerp Management School a really nice course which we called Global Leadership Skills. It was compulsory for all master's students. And what we did is we combined three elements. One was basically self-awareness. So they really had to get to know themselves, what kind of leader they might be, what their characteristics, strengths, and weaknesses are. The second was global perspectives. They had to learn how to work on multicultural teams. And the third was sustainability or societal consciousness. And I think this is a really vital combination, because this is what prepares people for the real world that they will be in. Not only that, we do find that more and more companies ask us to bring them people who not only have the technical skills or the knowledge that they might need to do a job, but to come with a certain understanding of the world, certainly an appreciation for the sustainability challenges, an attitude of innovation, an ability to be resilient, because one of the things that is most challenging for companies now is, crises are coming thick and fast. And so they constantly have to adapt. And what I've heard directly from one big employer is that many of the people they hire have the technical and the knowledge, technical skills and the knowledge, but they don't have the resilience. They're not able to adapt when the times get tough. So all of that, you have to prepare people differently for a different kind of world, for a very dynamic, disruptive, and even uncomfortable world. And that needs a different kind of education.
Thank you so much. One last question. We've talked a lot about roles here. We talked about HR, we talked about CEOs, managers, employees, but I would like us to talk about humans, all of us. And for all of us, like any human listening to this discussion, what would be the first step they can take in 2025 towards living in a regenerative way and thriving?
Well, there are so many things we can do as individuals, and we should never feel powerless, because we're part of a system, and it's like ripples in a pond. These accumulate as we take actions. It collects in the system and causes tipping points eventually. But there are maybe 4 or 5 things that are obvious. So, what do we buy? Are we buying things that are good for nature and society? That means fair trade. That probably means organic. It means low on packaging or plastic. We can make these very simple choices. How do we get around? So are we using public transport or walking, cycling, or driving electric, which increasingly will be an economically feasible thing to do everywhere in the world, since the Chinese have brought the costs way, way down. So electric vehicles, what kind of energy do we use? So is it renewable energy? In most countries now, it's entirely possible to select 100% renewable energy. So we need to do that if we can. One of the biggest things, I think, which we've talked a lot about already, is where do you choose to work? I mean, where are you putting a third of your life? Are you choosing companies and workplaces that are consistent with your values and that are bringing the solutions rather than being part of the old guard legacy companies that are hanging on and creating more of a problem? So, there are all these kinds of things that we can do. Of course, voting. I know as we record, you've just had a very trying time with votes in Romania, but it's, in fact, this year has been a year of voting all around the world. And, it really does matter. In those countries that have free and fair elections, you can actually make your voice be heard there. And even if people get into power who you don't agree with, democracy is not just about a vote every 4 or 5 years. It is about constantly making your voice heard and putting pressure and joining movements, joining communities, joining pressure groups, and making sure that you're very active.
I love this for the end of the year, like be very active, get involved. No changes, I think, are going to be done if we sit on the couch, right? I've tried that part. It didn't really work. So now I'm trying a more active way. Wayne, thanks a million for all your time and all the knowledge. I will make sure everyone has all the links they need to access you. And I'm pretty sure you're going to be bugged a lot more after this conversation. Have a great evening. And I really hope we're going to have the chance to talk soon about how many insights and how many results companies have now that they're going into regenerative paradigms. Thanks a lot.
Well, thanks a lot. And just to end, I offer this, and it's up to you whether this is useful to include or not, but I often end with a poem just to bring a creative spirit and to speak to the heart, not only the head. So let me do one quickly called Change the World, since that's what we've been talking a lot about. Let's change the world, let's shift it, let's shake it and remake it. Let's rearrange the pieces, the patterns in the maze, the reason for our days, in ways that make it better, in shades that make it brighter, that make the burden lighter because it's shared, because we dared to dream and then to sweat it, to make our mark and not regret it. Let's plant a seed and humbly say, I changed the world today. Let's change the world, let's lift it, let's take it and awake it. Let's challenge every leader, the citadels of power, the prisoners in the tower. The hour of need's upon us. It's time to raise our voices, to stand up for our choices, because it's right, because we fight for all that's just and fair, for a planet we can share. Let's join the cause and boldly say, we'll change the world today. Let's change the world, let's love it. Let's hold it and unfold it. Let's redesign the future, the fate of earth and sky, the existential why. Let's fly to where there's hope, to where the world is greener, where air and water's cleaner, because it's smart to make a start to fix what we have broken, our children's wish unspoken. Let's be the ones who rise and say, we changed the world today.
That's the best Christmas gift I could ever ask for. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and wonderful to be with you. All the best.
Thanks for joining What's the Purpose of It? Until the next time, keep challenging the rules, rethinking the norm, and building workplaces where purpose leads the way. See you soon.